The council chamber buzzed with unease as 50-odd races gathered, glancing nervously at each other. The ambassador of the Lari, standing tall at the podium, was the focus of attention. Her people's greatest minds had predicted the enslavement of the human race by now, yet here stood one of them, defying all calculations. He wasn't merely standing, he was advocating for a race they had met during a war with the Xander Empire to be granted membership into the council. The Lari ambassador had claimed that these humans had turned the tide of the war in their favor, and now all they sought was an introduction to the rest of the council. She found it absurd a race that had turned a war of annihilation into a victory and only asked for an introduction seemed too humble for the circumstances. The human ambassador, introduced as David Smith, walked into the room, his appearance unassuming, draped in simple textiles that covered most of his form. She snickered to herself at his unimpressive stature, barely 6 units tall, with 4 limbs ending in fingers and a patch of red fur on his head. David Smith spoke in Galactic Common, his voice firm yet calm, thanking the Lari ambassador and the council for their time. The chamber grew quiet as he began his speech, stating his purpose to request membership in the council on behalf of the Terran Union. He admitted humanity's rocky start in the stars, a mistake that plunged them into a war between the Lari Star Conclave and the Xander Empire. His voice carried a weight of sorrow as he described humanity's initial attempts at peace, only to be met with hostility. She noted with disdain how his gaze kept drifting towards the Xander ambassador, who, to her surprise, seemed to shrink under the human stare. The Xander, known as a proud warrior race, seemed uncharacteristically subdued, his crown frills folded in a gesture of submission. The human continued, recounting how the Lari had offered aid instead of annihilation, sparking a newfound hope in humanity. They vowed to join the stars, not as conquerors, but as explorers seeking peace. However, Smith's tone grew darker as he introduced humanity's 2 key messages to the council. The first was a declaration never again. He paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air before explaining. Humanity had lost 2,331 souls on the planetoid E53 Ganem, a loss they would never forgive. The Xander Empire had ignored their pleas for mercy, responding instead by glassing their colony from orbit. This act of brutality had left an indelible mark on the human psyche, one that would shape their approach to war. Humanity would no longer stay its hand, no longer show mercy to those who threatened their existence. The chamber was still, the silence palpable as the human's words echoed in the vast space. Lanha, seated among her peers, felt a primal fear rise within her, though she couldn't quite understand why. Her people had dealt with Deathworlders before, yet something about this human's demeanor, his calm and calculated anger, sent chills down her spine. Smith then moved on to the second statement, one that was meant more for the protection of the Council's nations than for humanity itself. He revealed that, despite their technological disadvantage, humanity's understanding of warfare was far more advanced than any race present. Their tactics and strategies, honed on their Deathworld, were beyond anything the Council had ever encountered. The weapons and technology that the Council deemed standard were, to humans, relics of a bygone era. He warned that if any race dared to challenge the Terran Union, they would find no battlefield, no line of Terran soldiers waiting to exchange fire. Instead, they would face a war fought with the ruthlessness and desperation of a species that had battled its own planet for survival. The chamber erupted into chaos as ambassadors shouted and roared, reacting to the revelation that humanity hailed from a death world. Lanha's adrenaline surged, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this human than met the eye. The Galavrck ambassador, towering over the human, couldn't contain his fury. He bellowed at Smith, accusing him of insulting their way of war and challenging them with threats. The Galavrck, confident in their superior strength and battle prowess, demanded the right to engage the humans in war. Smith remained calm, meeting the Galavrck's rage with a cold, predatory smile. He responded with a simple question, asking if they were sure they didn't want to sign the document before starting this war. The Galavrck ambassador, undeterred, declared that they would rip humanity apart, enslave their women, and toss their children into the void. His voice thundered through the chamber as he painted a vivid picture of the devastation they would unleash upon the human race. Smith's expression didn't waver. He listened, his predatory grin never faltering, before calmly repeating his question, offering the Galavrck one last chance to avoid the war they so eagerly sought. The chamber fell silent once more as the Galavrck ambassador's words echoed ominously. Smith stood resolute, a figure of quiet determination amidst the council's turmoil. The Galavrck, confident in their decision, refused the offer, sealing their fate. Lanha watched in awe as Smith, with a final chilling smile, accepted the terms of war. The tension in the chamber was palpable, every ambassador on edge as the weight of what was to come settled over them. Lanha couldn't shake the feeling that the Gavra had made a grave mistake, one that would have far-reaching consequences not just for them but for the entire galaxy. The human's final words, delivered with an unsettling calm, sent a shiver down her spine. "You sure you don't want to sign that document before we start?" The Gavra had challenged a race unlike any they had encountered before, and Lanha knew, deep down, that the galaxy would never be the same again. As the tension in the chamber reached its peak, the Gavra ambassador's towering figure loomed menacingly over the human, his multiple limbs quivering with barely restrained aggression. The other ambassadors watched in a mix of anticipation and dread, each considering the potential ramifications of what was about to unfold. Lanha, still seated, felt the pulse of her heart quicken, her instincts screaming at her to leave, yet she remained rooted in place. The Gavra ambassador, his voice dripping with contempt, sneered at the human's offer. "We have no need for your documents or your peace," he spat. "We will show you the true meaning of war, and when we are done, your kind will be nothing more than a footnote in galactic history." David Smith's expression remained unchanged, his cold, calculating demeanor unnerving those who were observing. He simply nodded, as if the Gavra's response had been expected all along. "So be it," he replied, his voice steady. "But know this: humanity does not take the destruction of our people lightly. We will not only defend ourselves but ensure that those who seek our annihilation will never threaten another race again." His words hung in the air, a solemn vow that resonated with a finality that made even the bravest among the council shiver. Lanha's eyes darted to the Lari ambassador, who had been the first to speak on behalf of humanity. His feathers were ruffled, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and something else, hope, perhaps, or a grim determination. The Lari ambassador knew what was coming, and he seemed resigned to it. The chamber was electric with the anticipation of war, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone present. The Gavra ambassador, undeterred by the human's warning, turned to face the rest of the council. "We, the Gavra, will take on this challenge. Let the rest of the galaxy see what happens to those who dare to threaten the might of our people." His declaration was met with a chorus of agreements from his allies, those who believed in the strength of numbers and superior technology. Lanha, however, noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The Xander ambassador, who had remained silent for most of the exchange, seemed to shrink even further into his seat, his eyes filled with a fear that bordered on panic. It was a stark contrast to the bravado of the Gavra, and it only deepened Lanha's unease. The human, seemingly unfazed by the Gavra's confidence, stepped back from the podium. "Then we are at an impasse," he said, his voice carrying a note of finality. "But remember this: we have learned from our past, from the wars we fought on our own world, from the mistakes that nearly destroyed us. We have evolved, not just technologically, but in our understanding of what it means to fight, to survive, and to protect. And we will bring that understanding to this war with that." He turned and left the chamber, his steps measured and deliberate, leaving the council in stunned silence. Lanha watched him go, a sense of foreboding settling in her chest. This was not the end, this was only the beginning. The council was left to grapple with the implications of what had just occurred. The Gavra ambassador, still brimming with confidence, was already speaking with his allies, planning their next move, but Lanha could see the uncertainty in the eyes of the other ambassadors. They had all witnessed the resolve in the human's words, the unyielding determination that promised a war unlike any they had seen before. The Lari ambassador, who had remained silent during the latter part of the exchange, finally spoke up. "We must prepare," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of experience. "The humans are not to be underestimated. They are not like the other Deathworlders we've encountered. They have something that makes them different, something that makes them dangerous." His words sent a ripple of unease through the chamber. The Gavra ambassador scoffed, dismissing the Lari's warning. "They are but one race, new to the stars. We have faced greater threats and emerged victorious. This will be no different." But Lanha and a few others weren't so sure. The human had spoken of a deep understanding of war, a history filled with conflict and survival. This wasn't just bravado, there was something behind those words, something that suggested the Gavra might have bitten off more than they could chew. As the council began to disperse, Lanha couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment, one that would shape the future of the galaxy in ways none of them could predict. Back on their respective ships, The ambassadors communicated with their homeworlds. The decision to go to war against the humans relayed through secure channels. Lanha, once she was back in her quarters, reviewed the information on humanity that had been shared earlier. The data was sparse, fragmented, but what little there was painted a picture of a resilient, resourceful species. They had survived countless wars on their own planet, each one pushing them closer to the brink, yet they had always managed to come back stronger. She frowned, scrolling through the reports of their technological advancements. While still developing, there was something terrifyingly rapid about their progress, as if they were learning and adapting faster than any other race had before. The Galavrck, she knew, were walking into a storm they didn't fully understand. As she prepared her own report for her superiors, she hesitated, unsure of how to convey the sense of dread that had settled over her. What words could she use to describe the quiet menace that had emanated from the human ambassador, the way he had spoken of war, as if it were an old friend, one they had long outgrown but still remembered all too well? She shook her head, pushing aside her doubts. This was war, and in war, one had to be decisive, confident. Yet, as she closed her terminal and prepared for the long journey back to her homeworld, she couldn't help but wonder if the Council had just unleashed something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. As the first fleet of the Terran entered the system of GRD-6, I watched in tense anticipation. The fleet scanners revealed 75 Galavrck warships, nearly 5 times the number of the first fleet, which the Terran war leaders called carry yars. The overwhelming odds seemed insurmountable, and I knew they would be crushed here and now. The gravity of the situation compelled me to leave. I couldn't remain on the bridge when the ship was inevitably destroyed. When I requested to be taken to my personal craft, their war leader laughed and said, "They aren't even in our weapons range yet. And you want to leave?" The unyielding amusement on his face grated on my instincts, tempting me to slay him right then. But before I could react, the human ambassador spoke up. "Ambassador Lanha, this is the best seat in the house. You requested to see how we conduct war. This is where you can see it best." The damned monster, so easily baited into war by the Galavrck, looked confident of their victory. I relented, saying, "If you can assure my safety, I shall remain. However, when this battle turns for the worse, I want the fastest way off this ship." The crew immediately sprang into action as the war leader barked orders and requested updates. One crew member, a woman with short-cut pale yellow fur, reported that the Galavrck hadn't made landfall and the garrison forces were holding them at bay. It was odd a mere garrison on a backwater colony, one deemed strategically worthless, was keeping the Galavrck at bay. The intel officer, responsible for reporting enemy activity and scanning the system, expressed confusion at the Galavrck fleet's movements. He displayed an image of their fleet, though still 15 giga-units away. The clarity was astounding, as if we were right next to them. The war leader turned to me, puzzled, asking, "Are they moving into broadside formation?" I gave a nod, a human gesture of affirmation, expecting the war leader to show signs of dread. Instead, he laughed. At first, I mistook it for madness, a sign of a broken leader. But his expression told a different story. He was grinning, an exaggerated smile that bared his fangs, a gesture I'd been told signified a human's absolute confidence in their truth. His next order left me dumbfounded. "Bring us into weapons range, and let's teach these 4 armed incestuous aliens what happens when you present a larger target." I am not a war leader, nor part of a battle clan, but I understand basic galactic void combat. Typically, 2 fleets circle each other, closing the gap until weapons range is achieved, then fire salvo after salvo until one fleet is immobilized, leading to boarding actions. But the humans seem to sneer at this noble form of naval combat as ineffective. The human fleet advanced straight at the Galavrck, not even turning their broadsides. At 8.5 giga-units, the Terran fleet stopped. I hoped they had realized their error and would now follow the example of their betters. But what I heard next shattered that hope. The intel officer leaned back in his chair and announced gleefully, "Weapons range achieved." High Emperor, if you read this, no, I am not exaggerating. Terran weapons range is 8.5 giga-units, nearly 4 times that of our laser cannons. I couldn't believe it until the weapons officer confirmed, "Weapons are hot, tubes are loaded, nukes ready, PDS deployed and waiting, sir." I looked at my fellow ambassador, a whirlwind of emotions swirling within me. He smiled and said, "The show is about to start." The human fleet fired their max. For a moment, nothing happened, then the ship groaned as if struck by something. Through the viewport, I saw spears of light race across the heavens, striking the Galavrck ships. In an instant, 15 Galav ships imploded under the impact. Every Terran ship had not only hit its target but obliterated it. Before I could fully process what I had witnessed, the war leader ordered, "Fire half the tubes in a crane wing formation." I watched in horror as hatches on the prow of the vessel opened, releasing a flotilla of cylindrical ships that arched above and below the Galla fleet. For the first time in nearly 300 loops, I prayed, if these Macs were so deadly, why have more than one weapon system? Nanox cycles later, I learned the terrifying truth. The tubes were not piloted by humans, they were self-guiding, as the ambassador explained later. Each tube, upon nearing its target, unraveled into thousands of smaller vessels, each carrying an explosive device equivalent to a Carius mortar shell. This was no ordinary weapon, it was a high-output scatter laser cannon, capable of unleashing a devastating barrage that no fleet could withstand. In the span of 5 Nanox cycles, the humans had laid 42 Galav ships of the line to a quick and dishonorable death. My blood boiled for the first time since I was a broodpap. But this, my emperor, was not the worst of it. The Terran fleet's final weapon was the most horrifying of all. The war leader called for nukes to be fired at all remaining Galav ships except one. I watched in dread as smaller vessels, no larger than the tubes, propelled themselves from the prow of each ship. They shut off their drives after a few seconds, and for a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, the ends of the Galla formation flashed like stars burning brightly, only to vanish moments later. Had the rest of the missiles missed? I wondered. But then the heavens shone with the light of 1,000 suns, and in an instant, it was over. I turned to the war leader and then to the ambassador, seeking answers. The ambassador's response was chilling thermonuclear missiles, much like your people's first void ships, but with a bit more impact. And so, my great emperor, it is with a heavy heart and dread for the fate of our people that I must now ask the unthinkable. I throw my life at your feet if it means you heed my words. We must not, under any circumstances, become the enemy of humanity. If we do, we are doomed. I implore you to sign the document I am transmitting and beg of you, do not seek out the humans in any theater of combat. Ambassador Lanha, the council was silent. The Galav ambassador was a husk of his former self, once an imposing figure, now malnourished and gaunt. His voice, once strong, was weak as he called for the human ambassador. The human stood from his seat, where he had been an allied guest of the Lari, and walked to the center floor. "What do you want?" he growled, anger seeping into every word. "We surrender," the Galav ambassador replied. "We place our fate in your hands. All we ask is that you show us mercy." The Galav ambassador's voice quivered as he continued. "We see now why you wished for peace, why you have rules for war, and we offer our conditional surrender." The human ambassador's eyes narrowed. "What were the 2 things we told you?" "What were our only 2 messages to this council?" The Galav ambassador looked confused. "We wish to surrender. Why does this matter?" The human's voice rose in anger. "Because we warned you. We told you to sign, told you not to attack or kill civilians. We said you would die if you crossed the line." He calmed down slightly, adding, "So no, we don't accept your surrender. We pulled your logs we know about Baliga." The Galav ambassador froze, his face draining of color as his hand began to shake. The human's gaze was icy. "Shall I tell the council what it is?" the Galav ambassador stammered. Aye. The human continued, "Baliga is a protocol for all Galav fleet admirals. If the flagship is the last ship to survive a battle, it is to detonate its main and secondary reactors near its primary objective. The resulting explosion is enough to start a chain reaction that will destroy most habitable planets." The council members exchanged uneasy glances as the human paused. "This council has laws against the intentional destruction of habitable planets. So I ask, what was most Galav admiral's primary objective?" The human turned back to the Galav ambassador, his tone hard. "We will only accept an unconditional surrender of all your galactic holdings and people, and anyone involved in the Baliga protocol will be handed over for trial." The Galav ambassador sank into his seat. "What will happen to them?" he asked, his voice trembling. The human's response was chillingly calm. "They will be placed in a habitat on a lifeless rock in your home sector. We will place a primary and secondary reactor on the other side of that rock. They will have 5 hours until the reaction reaches them. But they will most likely meet their end within 2 hours as the radiation wave ravages their internal organs." The human's voice was filled with a cold wrath. "You see, that is the fate they authorized for 3 of our colonies. They will go into hell feeling the excruciating pain they inflicted, knowing all the while that they were warned. The Galav ambassador asked hesitantly, "And what of my people, those who fought and those who didn't?" The human's expression was stern. "Your Imperium will be destroyed. Your people will be renamed and made a protectorate under the Terran Union for 500 human years." The human continued, "Combatants will be assessed on a case-by-case basis. Those found guilty of war crimes as outlined by the Geneva Convention will be punished accordingly. Those who haven't broken our laws of war will be allowed to return home." His voice was unwavering. "As for you, Ambassador, we know about your involvement, and a suitable sentence has already been chosen." The council room fell eerily silent as his words hung in the air. The Galav ambassador, now a shadow of his former self, asked, "What will you do with me?" The human's eyes narrowed. "You will be made a historian. You will be sent to a different station every cycle, telling all who will listen that you are the last Galav, the one who had the chance to save your people and stay humanity's wrath, but instead chose to fan it." The human's voice was like steel. "When that flame grew beyond your control, it was you who doomed your people and yourself by signing the Beliga Protocol into active use." The Galav ambassador rose slowly, worn down by 5 months of war. The Galav ambassador, find these terms unacceptable. We will never bend the knee to you." His defiance echoed in the council chamber, but it was a hollow declaration. 5 months later, the Galav homeworld was virus-bombed by the Terran Union's First Fleet. The ambassador and his cousin, the Galav Emperor, were found among the dead, along with 50 collaborators. They had underestimated the Terran virus's lifespan, believing they could wait it out in a well-supplied bunker. Their remaining strongholds surrendered unconditionally. Human civilian lives lost to Galav forces totaled 1.3 million across 6 colonies. Galav civilians saved from Gamor numbered 3 trillion, 2.7 billion, and 245,000. The Terran Union's victory was absolute, and the Galav were no more. The consequences of defying humanity were catastrophic, a stark reminder to the galaxy of what happens when one underestimates the wrath of the Terran Union. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.